Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Franklin Smith, and I'm a partner with the Simon Phoenix Group. And welcome to everyone who's logged on this morning to our webinar today entitled Relieving the Pain of Tax Receipting. It's an absolute pleasure to see so many of you who received our emails inviting you to join in to actually be here. So thank you very much. We also, for everyone who's in attendance, we also have a significant number of individuals representing faith-based schools today in today's webinar. So we have a number of different options relating to the topic of tax receipting and relieving the pain thereof. And because so many faith-based schools are represented, I'm going to spend more time than I normally do in this webinar talking specifically to the CRA faith-based tax calculation. Those of you out there who do represent faith-based schools will no doubt realize that it is December now, and we're coming to the end of another calendar and tax year, and it's time to start running that calculation and getting ready for tuition tax receipting to be run and delivered by the end of February 2014. So that is an area where our company and our software is particularly strong and adept at providing expertise in, and so that's why I want to spend some time on that. Just as a bit of an introduction, we have clients, we have current clients on today's webinar. We have hopefully schools that are thinking about and going to be clients of ours. So just as a bit of an introduction, who and what is the Simon Phoenix Group? Simon Phoenix Group is a software development and consulting partnership. We are based and headquartered in the Greater Toronto area. We are a proudly Canadian company, of course, and the partnership is headed by myself and my business partner, Ivan Simon. Now, yes, we are a software development firm, but we're more than that. My business partner, Ivan Simon, has 25 plus years of professional software development expertise under his belt. And so that part of the business is certainly very well managed and very well taken care of. I myself do not come from a software development background. I come from a management consulting background, and I spent 8+ years at the executive director level of GTA area faith-based schools. So I have a very deep understanding of the CRA faith-based tax calculation, as well as a very deep understanding of the data and information management needs of independent and faith-based schools. On top of that, I was also a management consultant heavily involved in the amalgamation of the Toronto District School Board way back when in the late 90s, early 2000. So all that being said, we certainly feel your pain. For those of you who do find the faith-based tax calculation and managing the whole tax receipting process to be a painful one, we certainly understand it. And that's why we're here with what we believe to be a very robust and very affordable solution. So, having said that, without further ado, by the way, for those of you who may not have seen the introductory slides that were running prior to about 2 or 3 minutes before the webinar started, just a couple of quick points to go through. We have the microphones at your end, at the attendee end, are all muted. We do that for a reason. We understand that life in schools is busy, and certainly coming up to the end of December and the December break is no exception. So by all means, feel free to answer the phone, have discussions that you need to have. You're not going to be disturbing the webinar. And as well, I'm going to be going through, as you can see on the screen, a presentation. As questions come to mind, you should have a user interface panel for the webinar up on your screen. And on that panel, there should be a question area or a chat area, one or the other, where you can type in any questions that come to mind. So feel free to type them in as they come to you, and we'll handle them at the Q&A portion of the presentation. All right. So without further ado, let's get going with a just a very brief background. And as I said, I'm going to focus in for the first little bit on the CRA faith-based tax calculation. The whole tax calculation is based on something that CRA put out back in 1975 called IC 7523. It's an information circular. And IC 7523 is certainly the base for the tuition calculation. 1975, yes, it's more than 35 years ago. And it is very much relied upon by the candidate audits issued. It's definitely open to interpretation. And even though the government certainly would never admit this, it is essentially an indirect means that the government has of providing, or a means that the government has of providing indirect funding for private religious education across the country. It's very important to keep in mind what IC 7523 is not. It is not legislation. It is definitely not unambiguous. In other words, I don't like using double negatives, but it definitely is and can be very ambiguous. It sometimes is not understood very well by auditors who work at CRA. I know of definite instances where an auditor has, as part of a regular audit, not because of any perceived irregularities, but just as a basic audit, came in and did not even know that faith-based schools, which were also registered charitable organizations, could even issue donation receipts for the religious component of tuitions paid, and therefore initially denied all of those issued receipts until he or she discovered the error of their ways. So it does happen. Oh, sorry, let me just go back. Whoops. Let me just go back there, and I see and oops, and there it is. Pulling it right off CRA's website. Good old September 29th, 1975. So there it is. I mean, that's essentially what it is. Not very long, and definitely open to different interpretations. All right. So what are the components of the faith-based tax calculation? Well, schools need to understand the splits between secular and religious curriculum. They need to know what their student population data is. They need to know what their expense base is. They need to have a good handle on non-parent income, and we'll get into each of these details, so I'm not going to dive into them right at this moment. And also they need to know what their tuition payments on behalf of their students for the year have been. And when you put all that together, ta-da, you get the answer. I know that's a bit flippant. It's not quite that straightforward. So let's go into the individual components. Secular and religious curriculum. Schools need to determine the percentage split. Schools most often do that on the basis of time during a given week or during a given scheduling cycle, how much time either on a whole school average basis or on a per grade basis how much time is spent on secular versus religious curriculum. And there it is. So there has to be something that those splits are based on. Again, whole school or grade specific, and the question of how to deal with separate academic years, because of course the tax calculation needs to be based on a tax or year, and of course schools, there will be 2 academic years that bridge a single calendar year. So how to deal with that. And you're going to see these last 2 points on the next number of slides. Is it reasonable, and is it defensible? Those 2 questions are really 2 questions that everyone has to keep asking itself from the perspective of, what I'm doing with the calculation, will it be by outside or as reasonable? And if you keep asking yourself those 2 questions and you keep getting the answer yes back, you should be. So what does this calculation look like? I've seen spreadsheets as simple as this, where a school will simply do a basic listing of time allocation based on its curriculum between religious and secular studies. And here's an example where the instruction time for grades 1 to 5 and grades 6 to 8 are different, and they come up with a percentage split that way. So I mean that's one example of how things can be done. So that's the curriculum piece of it. There's also student population data that needs to be taken into consideration. And of course, one needs to know a school needs to know what its student population is on a grade-by-grade basis. A school needs to know that really the faith-based tax calculation, in order to be reasonable and defendable, needs to deal not with actual student bodies, but with student full-time equivalents. And that can come into play in a number of different ways. Schools can have grades that are not full-day programs, such as a half-day JK, and schools also run into the situation of dealing with students who either are late admitters or early departures from a school year. So that also comes into play with the calculation. Data needs to be tracked by year because, as already mentioned, the tax calculation is conducted on a calendar year basis, which will bridge 2 academic years. And there's the point about student count versus full-time equivalent students. And again, is it reasonable? Is it defendable? So when I click on that button, here's an example, another very simple example. Sorry, one moment. Very simple example, 2 academic years, grade by grade. Here's a program where JK is a half-day program, so the students in those grades are weighted by 50% to get the full-time equivalent, and it's weighted based on the 2 portions of the academic year that fall within that calendar year, so you get a weighted average full-time equivalency number. So there you go. There's student population data. School expense base. Again, how to deal with 2 separate school years. Segregation of religious versus secular costs of education. This is critically important. Canada Revenue Agency knows, just like everyone who's in the independent school business knows, it's very easy to predict school expenditure, what a school spends its money on. I've mentioned these percentages to every single client or prospective client that I've ever sat in front of, and every one of them has nodded yes. So I'm very confident in saying that for every school that's out there on the webinar today, I can almost certainly guarantee you that your expenditures are 75 to 80% on your HR costs, another 10 to 15% on your facility-related costs, and then the balance, 5% or so, is everything else. So with that, CRA has a very specific way in which they want schools to track religious versus secular costs. It really comes into play with the vast bulk of what your expenses are, and that is your HR-related costs. And CRA doesn't want you to apply a percentage at the end of the year and do a journal entry. CRA wants to see in your directly in your financial accounting system that every single payroll, or at every single payroll for every single employee, it is split between the religious portion of their salary and the secular portion of their salary. And we have clients, based on our advice, based on advice from their auditors, who do this. That is an absolute requirement. If CRA comes in and wants to audit, they will ask to see that information. And if they see that all you're doing as a school is just applying a 35% split at the end of the year, journal entry, they must have that. So that's fine. And that was the question on how to segregate costs. What expenditures are not to be included? Well, CRA is very clear that costs associated with capital expenditures are not to be included in the calculation. There's a couple of other things, but that's the big thing, is the capital side of the equation. Is it reasonable, and is it defendable? So again, a spreadsheet example, and again, I've seen spreadsheets as simple as that laid out, just a full year assessment of expenditures, so that's certainly one way of doing it. But of course, spreadsheets, as we'll see in a few moments, have their own issues associated with them. So non-parent income. Where does the data come from? If you're having to go to multiple data sources to find where your donation income is coming from and where your non-parent income is coming from, that could be problematic, because the more sources you have, the greater the likelihood is that you're going to forget something in the calculation, and that is going to impact negatively, I would say, the ability for you to provide the maximum allowable benefit to your tuition payers. Specific questions that come up: how to deal with companies owned by parents. There are companies that pay tuition on behalf of students, and a question is often asked: if those companies are owned or run by parents, is that company a source of parent income or non-parent income? So that's something that needs to be watched. Distinguishing between grants, miscellaneous income, and non-parent donation income is always important, because that's a direct into the calculation. And again, the more places that you have that data stored, the greater the likelihood of missing something. Are any non-parent donation amounts not eligible for inclusion? The answer is yes, and that's the capital side of things again. So donations made for capital improvements or the purchase of buildings are not eligible at that. Again, is it reasonable? Is it defendable? The companies owned by parents. This question has been asked to CRA, has been asked to auditors, to then in turn go and ask CRA, and the answer coming back has always been companies that are separate legal entities are considered non-parent sources of income, because these themselves are not parents, even though the companies may be partly or wholly run or controlled by parents. Doesn't matter. If it's a separate legal entity, then it's non-parent income, which, by the way, if you think about it, could be a potential benefit for running the calculation, because if a parent who is of strong or significant means wants to direct a sizable donation to a school, and it's a perfectly legitimate donation, as long as it's not a as long as it's not a donation expressly for the purposes of capital acquisition, it could be and should be included as part of the calculation. Okay, student tuition payments. Again, where does the data come from? In most cases, it's going to come from your financial accounting system. Tuition payments by extended family. That adds a wrinkle on calculation because if you have multiple payors paying tuition for the same student or for the same students in a single family, then that's going to impact on how the non-receivable or secular portion gets allocated out. The non-secular portion then would need to be allocated to the individual tuition payors on the same proportion as their tuition payments themselves. It is not reasonable and it's not defendable to allocate all of the non-receivable portion to a single payor and then provide the full benefit to other payors. So that's, and you can obviously see the implications of that. You know, if you have extended family members paying tuition for a single student, such as grandparents, aunts and uncles, etc. We already talked about tuition payments by parent-owned companies, tuition payments made by securities transfer. That's a very specific case, which if I'm just being cognizant of the time, if someone reminds me during the Q&A session, if you're interested, I'll go into more detail about that. That's a very interesting and is reasonable and acceptable. So performing the calculation, you need to know these elements, and you basically have three options. I'm going to dispense with option number one because I really don't know anyone who does perform the calculation by paper, pencil, and calculator. But as you can see there, it's going to be very inefficient, very ineffective, and extremely time-consuming and prone to significant error. Most people that we run across, most schools that we run across who are not clients of ours, are performing it by spreadsheet. And time and time again, we hear about what an absolute I'm just looking for the right word here. What a it takes them a lot of time. Even with a spreadsheet, even with a well-developed spreadsheet model, there are still modifications, changes, updates, and if the person who developed the model leaves, then what? I consider myself an advanced user of Excel, and when I was running the calculation, it took me a fair amount of time. And it took the schools that I was working with a fair amount of time, even with the spreadsheet, to go through it, make modifications, evaluate the data, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of spreadsheet models, there's one right there. I've used that one for years and years and years before developing the application that you're going to that I'm going to show you, which is right there. But let me just finish with my slides. And there's computer application, which of course is going to have significant advantages. Really, the only disadvantage could be cost of purchase and the cost of maintenance. But we here at the Simon Phoenix Group strongly believe that we have that issue dealt with as well. And so I'll go into that. So significant advantages with using a computer application. If it's a well-developed application, there are fairly simple numerical inputs. There is no knowledge of spreadsheet programming or computer programming required. It allows for data checks, rapid calculations. Program calculations can be completed without mathematical error, and it allows you to run through multiple iterations until you're certain that you've got it right, and do that very quickly. So how many applications are out there that can perform the CRA faith-based tax calculation? As far as we're aware of, there's only one, and that's ours. And so I'm going to spend the balance of the next 15 or 20 minutes, just quickly taking you through our application and showing you what it can do. Our application is called Phoenix NP Complete. It is a multi-module application. Essentially, everything here on the left side of the screen, and you should be seeing the main menu now of our application, is our base module. Essentially, everything on the right-hand side of the screen is part of our add-on modules. But just quickly running through some of what our application can do. Our application is pretty logically laid out. It has full contact relationship management capabilities, two-person contact information. We use drop-down menus wherever feasible. We allow for contacts to be defined in terms of their relationship to the school, and we manage multiple relationship types. We have full support for pledges and donations. So when you think back to the PowerPoint that I just went through, and you ask yourself the question, where does all the data for the faith-based tax calculation comes from? Well, it's already, with the exception of potentially tuition payments, it's already resident within our application. So donations can be entered quite straightforward within our system. I'm not going to go through the step-by-steps because that's a topic for a more detailed training session. But suffice it to say, support for entering donations, for pledges, for managing contacts, telephone and email information. So it really is all there. There's other elements here to the contact module, and I'm going to go back to the tax receipt portion in a few moments. But I want to hit on each of those elements, those main inputs into the faith-based tax calculation. So that then let us jump then to the student module. And in the student module, of course, there's a whole bunch of different functionality, but let's just go into the main student screen, and this allows the school to track all of its students. Students obviously are linked back to their parents. Students can have siblings. Students, of course, are individuals, and they have phone numbers that their parents can be reached at, and their parents have email addresses, and they could be on medications, and they could have medical conditions, and they could have allergies, dietary restrictions, non-prescription medication permissions, and notes. So it's a full system allowing for storing and managing of a lot of data. And when you ask yourself, okay, where does the student population data come from, and how does Phoenix NP Complete perform its weighted average full-time equivalent calculation? It's from this data, which is already resident in the application. So as long as all of your students are entered in the system and properly categorized for the 2 academic years that touch on the calendar year, then you're good to go. The system will automatically perform the weighted average FTE calculation. So that's, again, in the Reader's Digest version of what our student module can do insofar as it touches on the faith-based tax calculation. So that then takes us to tuition payments, and we have a revenue module, and in that revenue module we have functionality to store tuition and other revenue either by student or by family. So this is perhaps one question that some of you out there might be asking yourselves. The one thing that I didn't mention or didn't expressly mention when I ran through my my PowerPoint slides is that IC 7523 requires the faith-based tax calculation to be conducted on a per-student basis. Now, we certainly know that there are schools out there, faith-based schools out there, that charge a family-based tuition. So for, one student, the tuition is X. For two students, it's, a little bit more than X, and so on and so on and so on. But it's a single tuition amount based on the number of students from that same family that are enrolled. Well, we and our software application provides full support for that. So we can apply family-based tuition and allocate it out on a per-student basis for the purposes of running the tax calculation because as unambiguous as IC 7523 might be, that is one area where it is definitely not unambiguous. It is definitely not ambiguous, I should say. It is very clear that the calculation needs to be performed on a per-student basis. And so if you're determining a cost per student, then you need to know what the tuitions were paid also on a per-student basis. So as I said, we have support for that. Now, there are two ways of getting tuition and other revenue data into our application. There is the way of being able to click and enter tuition payment by tuition payment, and we do have some customers of ours that do it this way. We have other customers who say to us, we really want to run and manage the accounts receivable side of our business using QuickBooks or Simply Accounting or some other financial accounting software application. And that's great. That's fine. If I was managing the finances of the school, I would probably want to do the same. So we have built support in our application to allow for the importation of data, revenue data, out of your financial accounting package into Phoenix NP Complete by way of spreadsheet upload. And we can support any financial accounting package that can export its data to a spreadsheet. 100% that includes Simply Accounting and QuickBooks. Those two applications easily export their data to spreadsheets, and we can import. And we can import either student-based tuition or family-based tuition. So I'm just going to click on that little button, and the system tells me it's loading student-based tuition. And so I'm going to go to my spreadsheet and say open it up, and the application is going to think for a couple of minutes or a few seconds. And a few more seconds. And you'll see in a moment why it's taking a few seconds to pull the data in. Time for another sip of my coffee. And there it is. And you can see that it's pulled in 2,340 individual records of data. So that's one way of dealing. And I can press upload, and it will upload all that data in. Actually, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to delete all these records. So let's just say yes, it's been deleted. Thank you very much. I'm going to exit out of here. We can also import family-based tuition, and our system provides support for how that family-based tuition then is weighted. Excuse me for one sec. Just close that. Okay, so as I said, the application allows you to select which method you're going to be using. I'm going to weight family-based tuitions on according to student FTE counts. So I click the same button. Yes, now the system tells me it's going to load family-based tuitions, and I go to my family tuition spreadsheet, and again, the system will think for a few seconds. And now it tells me it's processing the family data into student data. And there we go. So it's a different data set. This is all this data is all test data anyhow. So I'm going to say yes. Let's upload all of that into the system, and it's going to upload those records. Yes, and there we go. They've been uploaded. So sorry, I'm just going to clear. Going to clear that. All right, so I've now uploaded revenue tuition data into the system. So it's really as easy as doing that. So there is no double data entry required. The point being, you can manage the accounts receivable side of your business using your financial accounting package, and literally once a year, at the end of the year, export your data into a spreadsheet and import it into Phoenix NP Complete. So no double data entry required. So we've dealt with students, we've dealt with families, we've dealt with revenue. I'm going to go back to the contact module and go into the tax receipts section, and let's open up the charitable tuition donation tax calculation portion of the application, and there it is. So what the system is doing is, based on the weightings that are have already been pre-entered into the system for the two portions of the academic year that fall in the calendar year that we're looking at, and this is looking at old 2011 data. The system is determining, because we're calculating based on an average secular instruction percentage, it's pulling out of the system an average number that it's calculated based on grade by grade splits. It's allowing the user to enter the total expenditure base for the two portions of the academic year that touch on the 2011 tax year. It's based on the percentage splits. It's calculating total secular expenses for the tax year. Now, of course, coming up with these percentages can be done in one of two ways. You can come up with a percentage split based on your curriculum, or you can back into a percentage split based on looking at your HR expenses and all your other expenses and splitting them between secular and religious, and then coming up with a percentage split on that basis, and then inputting that percentage split into the system. So that's one of two ways of dealing with it. The system is pulling non-parent income out of the contacts module, and that's the donations section that I showed you earlier. And it's pulling the full-time equivalent students, the FTE, weighted FTE average. It's calculating based on the data in the student module. So it automatically comes up with a net secular cost per full-time student, and I just refresh the screen by pressing Calculate Changes, and we can preview our data by clicking the Preview button. And what this screen is now showing is, for each and every tuition payor, what they paid, the advantage or non-receivable portion, and therefore the net allowable donation amount. And it's also showing for the particular student their enrollment ratio. So for a student, for instance, that was present for the full 6 months of the prior academic year and the full 4 months of the current academic year, their enrollment ratio would be 1. And this is where the system automatically takes into consideration students who may have graduated or students who maybe entered the school late or withdrew early. And the system, as I said, automatically calculates that, and that's taken into consideration in this enrollment ratio. So this data can be viewed, can be exported to Excel, can be reviewed and very thoroughly understood before actually going ahead and issuing receipts. And you'll see a button here that's grayed out called Generate Tuition Donations. The system allows you, based on this data that you see here, will automatically convert that data into individual donation amounts that can be printed. And I'll show you how to do that momentarily. You can see this button is grayed out. That's not a button that you want to be pressing multiple times because every time you press that button, the system will create donation receipts. Or it'll actually create the donation receipt records in the system, which can then be printed as receipts. So clearly you want to only press that once in any given cycle, which is why it's disabled. It's an administrator function, and only the administrator at any individual school, administrator of our software, can actually enable that button, and then once it's pressed once, it becomes automatically disabled and needs to be enabled manually again. So that's a little safety feature. So as you can see, our application takes into consideration all of the elements of the CRA faith-based tax calculation. I can tell you that our application has been running as a prototype initially for about 8 years, and it's now been a product for the better part of 5.5, 6 years. We have many clients who are using our application for running the faith-based tax calculation. We have had many auditors, people with accounting backgrounds, auditors, look at the allocations, look at the formula, look at the receipts that have been generated out of our system, and everyone who's looked at it agrees that it is an extremely precise calculation, takes into consideration all of the elements that need to be considered, and does so very accurately, as long as the data, of course, that's entered is accurate to begin with. So that's essentially where we are with that. I want to spend just a couple of minutes and just show you essentially how easy it is. Once you've gone through the tax calculation, once you've generated the donation receipt records, how easy it is to actually print receipts. And this is the portion of the application where tax receipts can be printed out of, and whenever our system generates a donation receipt, it is automatically flagged for printing and will become visible in the tax receipt for printing print queue. And so there are multiple ways of selecting receipts. You can see these 3 buttons, preview, print, and email, are all disabled because nothing has been selected here. So we can do the simple thing and select using the radio buttons here, but that can be time consuming. So I'm going to deselect all of those, and then you can see those buttons now become disabled. We also have a menu system where you can select by donation category, or a combination of donation category and dates, or you can select just by pure date, or you can select by donor and date. So I'm just going to select, just to show you what our receipts look like. I'm going to say I want to see all of the receipts from that donor. Press select, and you can see the system automatically pre-selects all of the receipts, and we can hit the preview button, and voila, there's a nice cover letter, and there's the receipt. This is a fairly standard receipt. The nice thing about our system is if you have a specific receipt template that you are comfortable using, there's no problem. We can put that into the system. This is a standard type which has all of the elements that CRA requires, including the nice little blurb there about visiting CRA's website. The nice thing that I do want to point out is that when you print a receipt for a donor and they have multiple donation records, rather than printing a single page for each individual donation item, our system accumulates them all on one piece of paper, does the math, and voila, there you go. And so it's all there. So it's just a matter of printing it. And so you can well imagine that some of these donation items are outputs from the faith-based tax calculation. And our application, once you create those donation records out of the faith-based tax calculation portion of our application, become donations just like any other donation, and they can be printed and reprinted as needed. So I have spent the better part of 49 minutes talking, and I did promise that the last 10 minutes of today's webinar is going to be a question and answer session or portion. So I'm going to open it up to anyone who does want to ask some questions, and I see we have some questions being asked or had been asked as we went through. So I'm going to start, and for those of you who are thinking about questions, by all means, now's the time to type them in as we go. So somebody's asked about reprinting receipts. Yes, definitely. The system allows for the reprint of receipts, and I'm going to show you where that can be accomplished. By going into this section of the application, it will present to you each and every receipt that has been generated in the system, and there is a printed flag here, already printed and awaiting printing. And you can see as I cycle through receipts, it will change depending on whether it's been printed or not. There's also search capability where you can search for a receipt number, so you don't need to cycle through them one at a time. But essentially, it's as easy as finding your receipt, and let's say this is the one that I wanted. It's already been printed. You just change that flag from already printed to awaiting printing, and this receipt will now appear in the tax receipt for printing queue that I showed you earlier. And it'll be in there somewhere. I don't want to go searching for it right now, but trust me, it is there. We verified it. So it's quite easy to reprint receipts. And I know that can be sometimes quite a challenge. I have certainly run into that. On February 27th, you get the telephone call from the parent or grandparent or whomever saying, I lost my receipt or I never received it. And so while the person is on the phone, you can go into the system and you can not only reprint it, but you can tell them when it was originally printed and hopefully sent out. And there you go. It makes it very, very easy, very straightforward. So that's reprinting receipts. Oh, yes, someone has, we have another person online today who has asked about emailing receipts. Emailing receipts is definitely possible through our application, and we allow for that. We have email selected receipts functionality where it allows you to email out receipts. So it can be done directly from the system. The thing with emailing receipts is that CRA is fine to allow you to do that, but only on the proviso that the school has taken all steps to secure the receipt that is being emailed from being tampered with or otherwise changed. So if you are running the full version of Adobe 8 or higher, you can create secured PDFs that will allow you to prevent the file from being edited. In addition, you can also secure it with a second password that will prevent it from being opened without the proper password. So under those situations, by all means, email receipts. And we have clients of ours who do email their receipts and save considerable staff time and money by doing so. Just bear in mind that you need to secure that receipt. All right. So let's see. Sorry, I'm just going back to my questions and seeing who else has asked. Who else has asked a question? Oh yes, someone. Okay, so a question has been asked. Is there a way to separate different types of donations, i.e., relative to a school trip or other event, which may be allocated to different fundraising events, I'm assuming, or different types of programs? And the short answer to that question is yes. Our system does allow for that. And if I go back into the main contact screen and the main donation screen, you can see here that we allow for the entry of donations on a record-by-record basis, and donations can have all sorts of data associated with them, and one of the bits of data that is associated is type of donation, and also there is a flag that can allow donations to be directed towards different fundraising programs, and that's the directed towards flag here. So you can see all sorts of different types of fundraising programs or donation directions, as we call them, in here. And so yes, individual receipts can be categorized on that basis. All right. Let's try and handle some of the other questions in the few minutes that's remaining to me. All right. Somebody has asked a question about reprinted receipts and whether reprinted receipts say original or reprint on them. And we allow for schools to manage themselves however they see fit, however they feel comfortable issuing their receipts. Our receipt templates allow for an original and duplicate copy. So a school can certainly send out to a donor either of the copies. So if it's a reprint, then by all means, the school can only send out the copy that's marked duplicate. There are other schools that really, for whom it really is not a big issue, because all of the other elements, or all of the elements of the receipt are otherwise unchanged. So if a donor chooses to try and pass on to CRA two receipts that are identical amounts and identical receipt numbers and identical dates, and try and claim them as two totally separate donations, let's face it, there's nothing to stop a donor from taking a photocopy of an original receipt that you send them and trying to pass it off as two separate donation receipts. So schools have and organizations have chosen to take two different approaches, but the bottom line is our software does produce a receipt that says original on it and a second identical receipt that also says duplicate. So the school is free to send whichever one they want in any situation. So I hope that addresses that individual question. So I see it's 10:59. I do want to stay on my agenda and on my timeline. So I am going to take the opportunity now of wrapping up, of thanking everyone who is online today. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we had a really strong showing today from schools, not just in Ontario, but we also have some schools and organizations from Alberta and New Brunswick online today. So thank you to you folks for being here as well. In terms of next steps, if you want more information, if you want some more details on anything that I may have only dealt with at a surface level, or want a more detailed look at our software, then by all means you're free to visit our website. Our website information is there should be in the bottom right of your screen. My email address is also there, bottom right of the screen. And I will take the liberty of mentioning that if you do want to reach out to us for more information, something that we ask all of our clients and prospective clients to do is to make up a wish list of everything that they're looking for in a software package or a company to assist them in tax receipting, tuition donation, tax receipting, faith-based tax receipt calculation. Make up your wish list and then take it, bring it to us, bring it to any other company that you want, and see how we stack up. We're certain you're going to like what you see from us. So anyhow, without further ado, it's 11:01. Thank you very much. I will wish everyone a great rest of the day, a very happy holidays to everyone out there, and we look forward to speaking with you in the very near future. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.